That's me in the spotlight. That's me losing my religion. Some people are shocked and appalled, but actually perhaps losing a religion or some aspects of the religiosity that we've picked up along the way isn't necessarily a bad thing. This morning, talking about what it means to deconstruct our faith. Joining us on the program now is Senior Pastor of Shore Community Church, Reuben Munn. Reuben, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Hi, Andrew. Always enjoy a good song and a chat with you.
Exactly. Sing along if you know the words on this one. I suppose it's one of those things, and look, if like me, you've seen a few winters, you've been a Christian for a few decades, perhaps you get to the point where some of the things that you used to know, in speech marks, perhaps you're not so sure of anymore. This doesn't mean throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but perhaps our faith changes over time, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really normal thing that it does. Some people get scared of that kind of process. They feel like they're questioning everything, doubting everything, and sometimes we wondered, am I still a real Christian, or does this mean it's all over? The word that sometimes goes around this is the word deconstruction.
Yep.
It's a bit of a buzzword, but it's a very healthy, very normal part of the faith formation journey to go through some kind of season where things feel a bit less stable in our faith, particularly, I think, for people that have grown up in a Christian home, and where things have been, we have this kind of received faith. It's been fairly settled. We haven't really questioned it. And then something happens, sometimes a life event or just sometimes our own internal questioning. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of questions and a lot of doubts, and it's all up in the air. But I think the first thing to recognize is this is good. This is normal. I think in its best form, deconstruction can lead us through into something that is deeper, where we have an examined faith. We don't want to just have a naive, simplistic faith. We want to have a deep faith that leaves space for mystery and uncertainty and ambiguity and all of those good things. So, yeah, I think in the first instance, just to recognize this is normal, healthy, I would say almost every Christian goes through this to some degree at some point. It's often young adults, 18 to 25 is when it tends to happen the most. But sometimes for people much, much older or younger, for some people, it's really chaotic, feels like a totally tumultuous season. Others, you barely notice it. It's a tiny little blip, but very normal and accepted. Yeah.
Some of us have a midlife crisis of faith, or whatever that looks like. But this questioning and re-examining, certainly this is a better alternative than checking our brains in the door and at the door and saying, oh, whatever pastor says, yeah, I believe that. I even believe the maps in the back of the Bible. No questions here. That's not necessarily a healthy response to faith or to God.
That's right. I mean, the maps at the back of the Bible are great because at least Paul knew where he was supposed to go in his missionary journeys. Yeah, I mean, these are all good things, but really good to kind of just have a look at what we believe. And it doesn't mean throwing the whole thing away. Sometimes deconstruction gets equated with deconversion, as if like the only off-ramp here is to completely throw it away. And I mean, to be fair, that's where some people's journeys have led them, but it certainly doesn't have to be the case. What I would say is if people are in that kind of space and feeling like, I've just got so much doubts at the moment, and questions, and things don't feel stable, I think, firstly, God really welcomes that. Like we see this in Scripture. I mean, Jesus welcomed Thomas with all of his doubts. He didn't send him away. He didn't rebuke him for that. He invited him into this relational encounter. And I think that's what God does. Like, he is absolutely fine with whatever questions we have. I think to journey through that kind of stage well is to journey through that with another person. To not to try and just figure all of these answers out by yourself, or go down the rabbit hole by yourself, or just sit alone with your own doubts, but just recognize, be in community, not necessarily someone who's going to give you all of the answers, who's going to be the guru. You don't really want that, but you want someone who's just going to be a friend on the journey, who can just have the coffees with you and just help to kind of reflect back what you're feeling and journey through that. And I would say too, as you go through this, for however long it takes, have that posture of humility, because you can become quite cynical. And sometimes it's like, my church is doing this thing I don't agree with, or whatever. And you can kind of just write churches off and write Christians off, and sort of we almost place ourselves above everybody else. So just have a humble heart, whatever you're thinking, and just acknowledge you don't have all of the answers. And so be open to learning, be open to growing, be open to the input of others along the way. Those are maybe just some helpful things to keep in mind while you're on the journey.
No, that sounds absolutely fantastic. One of the things I suppose which is more toxic is keeping it is our dirty little spiritual secret that, oh, no, if I'm having doubts, I can't tell anybody about this, least of all God. Well, God knows. And one of the things we learned from the Psalms, I suppose, is bring our doubts, bring our anger, bring our disappointment to God. I mean, that's the best place to take it, really, as Thomas did with Jesus. Say it to his face. He can handle it, right?
Totally. Yeah, and the Psalms are a great place to go. Walter Brueggemann talks about how there are these Psalms of disorientation, where like everything is turned on its head. You know, where are you, God?
Yeah.
How long, oh Lord? That's Psalm 13. You know, how long am I going to feel this way? How long am I going to have such sorrow in my heart? Is what David cries out. And I think those particular Psalms, and there's a lot more of them than we realize, those Psalms of lament, Psalms of disorientation, I think it's the majority genre in the Psalms. It's a real invitation to us. Like, that's real permission for us to be as real as the psalmist was with God. Like you say, God knows exactly what's going on in our heart. So we don't have to hide that or mask it or sort of feel like we've got to kind of be performative about this. We can just be brutally honest and real. Honestly, even if you're not sure right now if God is there and if he's real and if he's listening, because those are some of the questions we've got. But even those questions, don't let them stop you just saying, well, God, if you're there, if you're real, this is me. This is where I'm at. This is what I'm feeling. And just pour that out. Don't let it push you away from his presence, but just journey through this with God, with whatever's on your heart and with others.
Now, with respect to Brueggemann, perhaps they are psalms not of disorientation, but psalms of deconstruction. But with Brueggemann's analogy, I suppose after the disorientation comes the reorientation. With this deconstructive process, we don't just want to have it all taken apart on the floor. At some point, with the spiritual guidance, with God's help, we want to put this back together again, perhaps in a more robust way. Yeah,
that's the hope. That's the prayer. When I kind of went through a version of this, which was during my years at seminary, that's kind of where it led. Like, there was a lot of questioning and a lot of instability during that time, but I feel like I came through that with a faith that actually ended up being deeper, but with a lot of room for mystery. And this is, I think, the prayer of where people would come to is a faith that we can say, yes, I know what I believe, and there's this deep historic orthodoxy that's there, but there's lots of room for questions that I don't have the answer to and will spend my lifetime searching through. Mystery, ambiguity, the not knowing. And you realize this is actually part of me being me and God being God, that I don't have to have all this pinned down. And also, I would say a faith, when you move into this kind of reconstructed stage, a faith that leaves lots of room for difference among Christians and doesn't have to feel like it's just my tribe, my particular way of looking at everything that has to win the day. I can leave a lot of room for loving and listening and learning from others. So I think that is, and I'm not saying I've arrived in this kind of place, but this is kind of a deeper, more robust, more mature faith. And again, that's what makes deconstruction so healthy, because otherwise, if you just stay back in the kind of naivety and simplicity of an earlier stage of faith, I think you miss out on a depth that can be there. But the road to that is that tough road of deconstruction.
It's as if grace is part of the gospel message. It's as if God's ways being higher than our ways is actually in the Bible. Of course, we can bring our doubts to God. He's not going to be disappointed with us. In fact, I suppose something that I've realized recently is you can't doubt anything unless you believe it. That doubt isn't the opposite of faith. I think the opposite of faith is something much darker than that, but doubts in some ways are a part of faith or an expression of faith as we wrestle with issues, as we seek to go deeper with God.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, we often assume that faith and doubt are opposites, like they're opposite ends of a spectrum, and if you've got more faith, you must have less doubt, vice versa. But the Bible never presents it that way at all. I think the analogy I sometimes think is faith and doubt are like dance partners. They're designed to go together. And I think of that, who was the man that said to Jesus, I do believe, help me with my unbelief. And they're both there in the same sentence. There's that sense of, I do have faith, I think I have faith, but at the same time, I have this unbelief and unfaith within me, and they're both coexisting, and that's okay. So again, that's the tension of recognizing we can have a sense of faith. Faith ultimately is relational. It's relating to the person of Jesus, not just this cognitive certainty about every single thing that we believe or that the Bible says. So we can have that relational faith, trusting in the person of Jesus, and at the same time leave a lot of space for, yeah, I'm still not sure about a whole lot of things. And I may have seasons where, man, it all feels like it's still very unstable, but that's okay. That can still be held within the presence of Jesus and within a sense of faith and trust in him.
And that's a prayer that Jesus is faithful to answer. Well, at least that's my current belief strategy. That help me with my unbelief is an invitation to go deeper in our relationship with God. Reuben, fascinating topic. Thanks for jumping in on this one. Thanks for joining us today.
Sure, Andrew. Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.